the way that they used those kids as cash cows. That's the name that people say, cash cows.
Indigenous youth are being monetized by the child welfare system.
They were legitimately a paycheck.
Doesn't that strike you as incredibly racist?
Absolutely, it's racist.
I remember hearing, we can't lose them. We make X amount of dollars and per diem off them a month.
Do you feel that Indigenous youth are being exploited today?
Yes.
And the motivation is?
Money.
The people you're hearing from are too scared to show their faces, worried the companies they used to work for will sue them for speaking out, or they'll be blacklisted in the industry. We've changed their voices to protect their identities.
You're worried that if you show your face today, they will sue you?
Yeah, why wouldn't they put money down to dismiss me?
These are some of more than 50 child welfare insiders who told Global News they believe some for-profit group home companies in Ontario are targeting, or in some cases even charging more, to care for Indigenous youth.
There continue to be dollar signs placed on Indigenous people in this country, certainly our children and youth.
Sylvia Maricle's life's work has been supporting and advocating for Indigenous peoples.
It's no different than the process of residential schools. They're taking them away from their families, they're taking them away from their culture, they're taking them away from their language. Non-Indigenous people are making money on the backs of these children.
Group homes are supposed to be safe havens for kids and teens who may have come from abuse or have complex needs. The vast majority are located in southern Ontario, and more than 40% of them, 130 homes, are operated by for-profit companies.
I don't think people realize what goes on behind those closed doors, and I think that the average person would be quite shocked and frankly horrified.
It's children's aid societies that place youth in group homes. A select few run their own, but most turn to outside operators. And as we uncovered, some agencies are charged more than others, with the highest daily rates billed to one group: Indigenous Children's Aid Societies in the North. Agencies serving kids from remote communities with few resources.
What was the talk?
That we are aware that these youth can be difficult to place because of the limited resources in their communities. So they're willing to increase the cost of the contract because they have limited options.
An exclusive analysis by Global News of how much children's aid societies in Ontario spent on group homes run by outside operators found that on average, Indigenous agencies in the North paid 26% more per child per day compared to non-Indigenous agencies across the province between 2012 and 2021. That translates to an estimate of nearly $28 million more over a decade. At the heart of those transactions, Indigenous youth, pulled from community and culture, often moved hundreds of kilometres away.
The system needs to know it's failing.
Megan Taylor was 10 when she first entered the child welfare system. From Grassy Narrows First Nation in northwestern Ontario, she eventually landed in a group home in the south.
What is the impact of moving an Indigenous child so far away from their home and placing them into care?
They just don't know who they, like I didn't know who I was.
Did you have access to your culture?
No. It's very scary too. It's like you're moving on a different planet, you know? I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere.
You don't know where you belong?
Mm-hmm. I belong to that little girl inside of me, and I need to take care of her, because nobody else did.
Every child placed in a for-profit group home comes with a contract, in some cases worth hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. This contract with a company called Connor Homes in southeastern Ontario was worth over $1,000 a day for one child.
It was all money. It was never, ever about the youth. It was always about money.
In 2017, its president, Bob Connor, sent an email soliciting children's aid societies across Ontario. "We would like to include you in our new endeavour," he wrote. "We have 37 Indigenous youth in our care. We aim to provide treatment that is culturally relevant to specific tribes." This former worker says Connor wasn't shy about the goal.
It was about we need to recruit youth from up north.
Straight out of his mouth.
Yes, we need to get kids from up north.
Why do you think companies are going after the North?
They see our children as the ticket to money.
Each for-profit group home negotiates a minimum daily rate with Ontario's Ministry for Children. But there are ways of increasing the price, like charging for multiple beds for one child if a youth needs a quieter home with more attention, or billing for one-on-one staffing for a child with complex needs. Group home companies say extra services are rationalized, documented, and approved by the placing agency. But workers on the front line say youth didn't always receive that extra care.
So they will profit off of the money that's allocated in the contract without actually staffing the one-to-one.
And were they still billing for that one-to-one
Yes.
care? Did you ever see the timesheets?
Yes.
In 2017, a local Children's Aid Society investigated Connor Homes and asked how it was possible for an Indigenous youth whose agency was paying for one-to-one supervision to attempt suicide twice. In a statement to Global News, Connor Homes said Indigenous children have not been funded differently. All are based on individual need, requested, approved, and managed by their native agencies. Some staff said there were occasional cultural offerings, though not always specific to a youth's nation. The company defends it offered culturally appropriate programming through an Indigenous treatment coordinator.
Child welfare isn't child and family services. It's the consumption of children as assets because it brings them money.
The Ontario government was long ago warned there were issues. In 2016, the Association of Children's Aid Societies submitted a report to a government panel reviewing the child welfare system. It found Aboriginal youth are more likely to be placed hundreds of kilometres away, that per diems are very high in some rural and remote regions, and for youth with complex needs, ministry-approved per diems are frequently augmented as a condition of admission.
Do you think there is space in the system for the for-profit model?
No, not over children. Nope.
The buzzing highways of southern Ontario stand in contrast to Heather Papacy's home, also Grassy Narrows First Nation. But she's lived in the south for years, bounced between more than 30 different foster and group homes. Among the most traumatic, she says, a group home in eastern Ontario run by Bayfield Treatment Centres.
Most of the youths who were there were Indigenous.
Yes.
Former workers did not allege Bayfield charged more for Indigenous youth, but say it was the environment they were living in that was alarming.
There was locks on everything.
Were the beds bolted to the ground?
Yeah. Even the table stands and the dressers.
A safety measure, some say.
I cried most nights. I was not proud to work there.
Former workers say the use of physical restraints was frequent. Kids and teens pushed against walls or pinned to the ground by staff.
They left more traumatized than they came in.
By law in Ontario, restraints are only to be used if a child is about to hurt themselves or others. But this former Bayfield worker says they were a means of control and power.
A lot of them joked about it. It was like, I smashed his face against the ground so hard that his teeth came out. And they laughed about it.
That person who bragged, she was a trainer or a supervisor?
She was a trainer and a supervisor, yes.
Seen a kid's arm broken in a restraint.
Ethan Pocono, whose father was from Batchewana First Nation near Sault Ste. Marie, lived at Bayfield from 2014 to 2017.
I've seen staff go to grab the kid, restrain them, literally smash the whole face off the table, nose bleeding. Staff don't care.
Was there any of that cultural richness where you ended up?
No. You weren't allowed to talk in your tongue. Staff would get mad, send you to your room, restrain you.
6 months after Ethan arrived at Bayfield, a delegation of workers from an Indigenous Children's Aid Society in the far north traveled to check on their kids. Global News obtained notes about that meeting, which show one boy told them he gets in trouble for using his language on the phone with his grandparents. Each boy asked if they could leave with them. One put it in chilling terms. "Are you here to rescue me?" Bayfield management declined an on-camera interview, but in an email said the company was cleared of any misconduct related to that visit, and at the time, the local Children's Aid Society said Bayfield had staff that were responsive to the needs of highly challenging youth. The Northern Indigenous Agency says it never placed a child with Bayfield again. Bayfield also said the information Global News is presenting is incomplete. It does not seek out or target Indigenous youth, and restraints are only used when de-escalation attempts have been unsuccessful. It says the small percentage of verified allegations have been addressed, and any comparison to residential schools, it rejects.
So we took that to the companies. One of them in particular said, we are not residential schools. We're not run by the church. We don't go and take kids out of their home. These are children's aid societies placing their children voluntarily with us. To that you say what?
BS. You can pretend. But if you're not Indigenous, if you don't have an Indigenous child and you get paid to care for them, you are part of the schism that's being created for the next generation.
While some former workers say Bayfield made attempts to connect youth with culture and language, and the company says it funds hotel stays for parents who come from afar, other workers say day to day, there was very little.
In our training, it was also very much promoted that they provide various cultural experiences and they honor individuals' cultures. And there was nothing.
Management said they work with a youth's team, including the placement agency, legal guardian, and in some cases, consultants, to ensure cultural needs are met.
Somebody has to teach the child or the child is not connected anywhere. Why don't you do it? You got all the money.
By law in Ontario, operators, including group homes, must make reasonable efforts to connect youth with their culture. And while Bayfield says it is compliant, an analysis by Global News of more than 60 provincial inspections across multiple companies from 2019 to 2022 found more than 200 cultural failings, including little evidence of cultural programming, inadequate staff training, and in some cases, no indication staff even asked a child about their background.
Nothing.
Not that I recall.
So you've got a home where 90% of the kids in your estimation are Indigenous, and you're saying there are no cultural offerings.
Not that I saw.
The Ontario government says it's improving oversight of group homes and increasing access to prevention services to keep Indigenous youth in their communities.
We had all the promises from governments in this country to say we're going to do it differently, but they don't know how to change the system.
Ultimately, the cost falls to the child, Maracle says, and is greater than that of any contract.
What are we doing to these kids?
You've broken them. The child's broken.
It was with an Eagle escort we experienced the humbling beauty of Grassy Narrows First Nation, a territory equally home to a bear sauntering into the boreal forest and a curious beaver, as a group of teens spending a summer's day on the cliffs of the Canadian Shield.
This is the trail to the cliffs.
It was a day just like this Megan Taylor was swimming at the cliffs when her life was forever changed. She was 10. Her family life wasn't stable, and she was placed into care. Moved farther away with each foster and group home until Grassy became a distant place. We traveled back here with Megan.
My mom used to sit me on that porch and braid my hair.
A site of simplicity and familiarity. One store, one gas pump, the band office. And though she doesn't live on the reserve anymore, it's still home. The road Megan has walked in her 21 years is paved with hurt. Like the foster home where she says she was so lonely, she would talk to herself.
They made these two priests throw water on me. They were saying I was possessed or something.
And the group home outside Toronto, where she almost took her life.
I really felt like they didn't care, I was just gonna be another Native that killed themselves.
Because you don't feel like anybody's there.
Mm-hmm. And all of the people that promised that they would be here for me, where are they?
The agony of leaving home is one the children of Grassy have known for generations. Residential schools, The 60s scoop, today's child welfare system.
I know what it feels like to be removed.
Mariah Swain was a young girl when she was taken away to residential school. Today, as the manager of Grassie's Child and Family Advocates Office,
Childcare expenses so bad.
she fights to keep kids out of the system and in the community.
Our children come back more damaged, so it's gotta stop.
The ripples of trauma quite literally flow through the waters of Grassy Narrows. In the 60s, a pulp and paper mill upstream dumped more than 9,000 kilograms of mercury into the river, destroying the fishing industry and leaving many irreversibly ill. More than 40 years later, leading researchers found 90% of people still had symptoms of mercury exposure. Today, roughly 1 in 5 people in Grassy is without work. The federal government says the water is now safe to drink, but most still don't trust it. And from this nation of only 1,600 people, more than 100 children are in care.
As mothers and fathers, we instinctively know how to take care of our loved ones. But the fact is that something got in the way.
Heather Papase was sent south.
So this is the last place you lived before you left?
Yeah, basically.
It took 30 hours by bus to travel back for a visit. A chance to reconnect with a way of life that was missing for so many years.
What does that feel like, being away from your community and your culture for that long?
It hurts. All I think about is the day I'm gonna go back and the day I'm gonna see a powwow again, you know?
Your culture is a strong part of who you are.
But just as Heather was able to leave the system, it haunts her again. A mom at 17 whose baby has also been in care.
I want to break that cycle. I want to get her back.
In the face of so much adversity in Grassy, family structures broken down, livelihoods wiped away, coping can be near impossible. Too many have turned to drugs and alcohol, with some ending up on the nearby streets of Kenora. And so on a summer's day, community members march through town to say, enough.
Hi, I'm Kukum Chrissy.
Including Chrissy Isaacs.
I'm raising my grandkids because my daughter's an addict and she's not capable of looking after them right now. I chose for them not to be in the child welfare system.
Her grandchildren, too young to understand the complexity of why their mother is not here.
People need to know how to be parented, and because they weren't parented. And guess why they weren't parented? Because they were sent to residential school when they all lived in peace.
Sylvia Maracle, the former longtime executive director of the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centres.
I talked about Indian residential schools, and here's the official apology.
Says for healing to happen, the money spent on sending youth to private group homes in the South needs to be redirected.
Where should that money be spent?
Mom could be sent to treatment. Mom could be sent to a parenting class. That same amount of money that's being invested could create these safe homes, could make sure that grandmothers have enough food and enough money, could make sure that they're child and youth workers.
The barrier, she says, is the way the current child welfare system in Ontario is built.
We have to stop trying to recreate it. We have to lose it and create something that empowers communities.
A landmark decision by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal confirmed what Indigenous communities across the country had been saying for years, that they were discriminated against by chronically underfunding child welfare services on reserve, creating an incentive to put children into care. As a result, the Federal Court of Canada approved the largest class action settlement in Canadian history last fall, $23 billion for those children and families across Canada. Cindy Blackstock led the human rights complaint.
This in some ways is a sad day, because when you pay compensation, it means that a child has lost their childhood, and that could have been prevented.
The federal government has also pledged another $20 billion to reform child welfare services on reserve across the country over the next 5 years. Among the most urgent needs in Grassy, housing.
There are many houses where there's like 10 people in one tiny 2-bedroom house.
In a striking symbol of just how dire it is, even the Child Advocate's office is a condemned trailer.
We needed an office, so that's kind of where they stuck us.
When a child in Grassy requires a new home, relatives and foster parents simply may not have the space.
I would really like to bring a family home. They have 6 children.
How many of those kids are in the child welfare system?
All of them.
And the barrier is housing.
Housing.
That's our goal, is to try to keep our kids in the community.
Chief Rudy Turtle says 50 homes are needed and has asked the federal government for help. And while the funding hasn't come through yet, a foundation for optimism is being built on the west side of the reserve.
So this is going to be a game changer in this
Yeah,
community.
definitely it's going to be a game changer, yeah.
5 houses, all fourplexes, for kids in care or those leaving the system, funded by the feds.
So this gives a place for kids to live who've been in the child welfare system.
Yeah.
And then is the next concern staffing?
We're hoping it's going to be Grassy people.
So giving jobs to people who live and work in Grassy?
Yes.
I'm hoping that as we move on further in our program, more communities will start saying, you know, we want our children back. We want them home.
Because home is more than a starting place. In Grassy, it is a place of return.